Welcome to the Work Sucks, But I Like It podcast. I just want to say thank you for those that have been listening. I hit 100 downloads of the show recently, and I love the feedback from everybody, and I appreciate the conversation. I really think it's an important one that we're having, that work is sucking, but maybe we can thrive in it, right? There's times that when it does suck, we can take that opportunity and to turn it into a challenge and making something sort of worthwhile, that we're working towards. And today I want to explore a movie that I watched recently, and it really got me sucked into this man's story of Chris McCandless, and ask, was this meaningful work in his lifetime? Because some fans hate what he did, looking at his adventure into the wild as idiotic when he graduated from college and being found dead in an Alaskan bus 2 years later, while others were inspired by his search for truth and meaning in his life, detaching from the material items around him that others seem to value so much. Some say his life was like a modern-day Henry David Thoreau, and from this episode you're going to take away 6 key points I have learned from Chris's story to make work meaningful. Hello, my name is Tony Tenaglier, and today I want to look at the story of Chris McCandless and ask a simple question. Was Chris in search of work that was meaningful? Because I believe that the story of Chris captures my aim in this podcast, that work can suck, but you can like it at times and can find meaningful work if you keep searching. Because it is actually in this searching where we do find meaning. It's the process, as they say, not the result of the process. So how does this story of Chris relate to finding meaningful work? Well, Chris saw society as sucking, with being attached to college degrees and material items. But as we will see in this episode, in my mind, he actually worked at finding what he called truth and meaning in his life. Now, most of the time people watch movies for entertainment. Others watch movies to maybe learn something new, or others watch movies because your girlfriend says it's her favorite movie, and you do it because it's the right thing to do on a weekend night. And that was me. I had no idea who this guy Chris was or what this movie was about. So I first learned about this story from the Sean Penn movie Into the Wild, released back in 2007, and as I was watching this movie here in 2025, right away it seemed to resonate and echo well with Henry David Thoreau's passage from his book Walden, when he lived in the woods for nearly 2 years. Here is that passage from Walden that I thought about. I wanted to live deep and suck out all the marrow of life, to live so sturdily and Spartan-like as to put to rout all that was not life, to cut a broad swath and shave close, to drive life into a corner and reduce it to its lowest terms. The lowest terms of life, driving it into a corner by living in the woods, to understand what it really meant to live. Now, unfortunately, we will never know what Chris's book would have been about if he did decide to write one, because he was found dead in an abandoned bus up in Alaska. He was only 24 years old. Some say what he did was suicide, having no map, no plan. He just hit the road, donating and burning his money as he went along. Others looked up to him for living life to the fullest. The bravery in his decisions of him wanting to do something like kayak down river rapids or hitchhike, trusting strangers to take him from point A to point B, that he was leaving no regrets behind in what he was working towards. But in order to understand if Chris was searching for the work that was most meaningful in life, there is one more quote I would like to introduce before we dive in, and that is from Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. Now, this book comes from a very different perspective on life. It talks about the harsh realities of Viktor himself living and surviving in a concentration camp during World War II, the pain and torture of everyday living there, and his desire to stay alive. Here is that passage from Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. Chris wasn't in a concentration camp per se, despite what seemed like a prison of material items and society's pressing expectations on how to live, but he did seem to want to reduce life like Henry David Thoreau did, and find in this space the truth of living life. He wanted a different response to the world he was living in, other than what society was telling him to work towards. So let's take both of these quotes, the one where we search for cornering life and reducing it to its lowest terms, as well as Frankl's view of finding growth and freedom when confronted with a stimulus and response, to see how Chris cornered life and found potential meaning in his life. But first, let's provide a summary, as some of you might not know the story. Into the Wild. A brief summary. It began with me watching the movie Into the Wild, as I mentioned, a movie to kick back and relax. However, it didn't turn into relaxing and would lead to the story consuming my thoughts on life and how to live it, how to find work in our existence, purpose. It reminded me of my own journey writing my first book, The Impression of a Good Life, Finding Your Song and Dance. Chris was trying to find his song and dance in life. You see, my girlfriend and I love the outdoors, and it's one of our favorite movies, soundtracks, and stories of being outdoors. And it was a great movie. I loved it so much that I bought it for my own personal collection at home on my computer and have watched it on repeat while building puzzles or Legos at night, being now able to even quote lines in the movie. So let's start with this movie, Into the Wild, that is based on the story of a man named Chris McCandless. Chris went to school to work on getting a degree, and after completing college from Emory University in Georgia, studying history and anthropology, he realized there was more to this world than just materialistic things to work for. He didn't want to be attached to these things, as shown in the restaurant scene with his parents, as they were attempting to celebrate his graduation from college. His parents wanted to get him a new car as a gift for his recent degree, and the actor Emile Hirsch playing Chris clearly shows his frustrations towards his parents for their seemingly shallow materialistic view of the world. He doesn't want these things. The car he has is a good car, he indicates to his parents. Why would he need a fancy car like his parents drive? It gets him from A to B. It's not going to blow up. During the scene, a group of local fans come into the restaurant from what appears to be a game that is either playing or just finished. They are cheering and shouting in great enthusiasm as they make their way to the bar. The scene contrasts celebration between celebrating for the work a sports team did to potentially have won the game, while Chris sits with his parents celebrating the work he did to get good grades, to earn a piece of paper with some words on it called a degree. While his parents look in disgust towards the rowdy crowd celebrating, it almost seems that Chris in that moment did all this work for his college degree, but isn't cheering like they are, celebrating like they are. Instead, he is caught in a discussion about getting a new car, which he doesn't need. It's as if he seeks this energy of celebration in life and this plants a seed for his desire to find it later on. This is later depicted as him standing on the abandoned bus in Alaska years later, arms raised and shouting to the world, expressing true freedom and happiness to being alive. The work to get there, into the wild. He had made it. And as this restaurant scene transitions, we start to see him cutting up his driver's license and destroying any evidence of his identity. It's clear that this trip has been planned before he was set to graduate, that all he needed was this degree, and this was his ticket out into the world. He donates the last of his college savings to charity and hops in his car driving west. No map, no plan, no pets, no cigarettes, just seeking adventure and what life will bring his way, a king of the road. The work is simple as he sees it with the road ahead of him, to find out what life really means. What's amazing is the soundtrack in which Eddie Vedder, the frontman of Pearl Jam, is singing away his lyrics as Chris drives off. There's a big hard sun, beating on the big people, in the big hard world. When she comes to greet me, she has mercy at my feet, and when I see her bitter charm, she throws it back at me. Once I dug an early grave to find a better land, she just smiled and laughed at me and took her blues back again. You yourself probably feel the weight of society today, playing the same song and dance in your life, expecting you to get a degree, get a job, and potentially even get married. If you have been working in industry and trying to balance this thing we call life, maybe you feel potential burnout and are looking for ways to counter that. Well, Chris was burned out from college and his upbringing, and he decided to make change. Change from the traditional song and dance of earning your degree, getting a job, and the only adventure left in life being to climb towards retirement. Chris clearly wanted a different track. But as we see throughout the movie, he is torn with what it means to have friends, what it means to have a family. He is seen in the movie waking up early in the morning to leave his newly met friend Ron, who, by the way, wanted to adopt him as they grew to have a close connection, with the intention of leaving without giving him any notice. But interestingly enough, prior to all this, On the beach, when talking with the hippie couple Rainey and Jan driving around California in an RV, he makes the astute observation of people running away from love. As Rainey opens up to Chris, indicating that all is not well on the hippie front, meaning Rainey and Jan's relationship wasn't that great at the time despite what it may look to be, being free and on the road doing their own thing. We learn later on that Jan's son had done something similar to what Chris did, leave his parents without telling him of his intentions. I have learned later on from YouTube rabbit holes and online posts about his life that his family life really wasn't ideal growing up. His sister talking about the stories of their parents yelling and arguing. Even in the movie there's a glimpse of the daily life in the McCandless home, the father indicating he was God and could take away Christmas. Domestic violence, both verbal and physical at times, with the scene also showing the father physically pinning his wife down to the bed. His parents were driven to make money by starting their own business. The American dream, for most it seems these days. Do your own thing. Do work that is meaningful and measure that by what you drive for a car or that home in which you live in. Work hard above all else and collect all these materialistic things. But at what cost? That hard work was able to buy fancy cars and houses, but it didn't equate to happiness and it left the family seemingly torn. Chris saw life to be more different than that. He didn't need anything but the truth. He wanted work that got him closer to that. And to work that out, he is shown in the movie as going through these chapters to prepare himself for his great Alaskan adventure. Let's fast forward through the adventures for a moment, which we will explore throughout this episode, to his final chapter of him laying himself down to rest. He is depicted in the movie as eating a poisonous plant and dies because of it. So we find him in this scene in the abandoned bus 142, where he stayed for over 100 days in the wilderness of Alaska. He writes one last message and takes a selfie on his camera that he has lived a good life, signs his name, and zips up the sleeping bag for the last time on this journey. With one last breath, he looks to the sun shining. With a smile and tear in his eye, he had made it. Now, of course, I never met Chris, and most of what was described is from the movie. So, of course, how much was actually representative of Chris? But that doesn't take away some valuable discussion points, because it is a great movie. And you should definitely check out the movie and read the book to help shape your own thoughts. But for now, let's carry on and see how this journey can help you think differently about the work you now do. Now, I don't think Chris was opposed to doing work. At least it wasn't portrayed that way, with this clear intent of walking and hitchhiking and bumming rides on rail cars for thousands of miles. That's a lot of work. It's enough work for me to hike a mountain here in New England. I can't imagine walking across the country or kayaking down Mexico and walking across a desert thereafter. His sense and directed vision of work was also demonstrated in his scene with Wayne harvesting grain in the field and doing what appears to be a dirty and hard labor job. That sort of manual work is also hard, and when Wayne asks him what he thinks of all this, Chris actually enjoys it. I think Chris was searching for what you and I search for in our lives, that sense of meaningful work, that work that is vital to your success on this planet and also fits into the world in which you live in, with the people you're around. Being in nature gives us the sense of what is required to actually stay alive. We do the same sort of work and soul searching in our own lives. We're in constant search of discovering our potential and finding friends and family along the way that best support that. But we have to corner our life to be able to see the stimuli in the space in order to respond to it. Chris's meaningful work. And I think this is where people take two sides to the McCandless story when they hear it for the first time. That on the one hand, they see him being reckless and not following along with society, that he burns his money and doesn't seem to care, but then later on is working at random jobs to make that money back. That he was a troubled kid, aloof, or whatever words they use. The point, though, is that they don't agree with the story in that what he did was right. That this working was actually against the grain of society and was not how to live life. You can't just give it all up and travel around. You need more structure in life than that, or what America values, a college degree. He did have it, though. While others, on the other hand, see him living life to the fullest, him not accepting the terms of what others were telling him how to live his life. These things of working on a degree or working to get a better car not being the best path in life. That if he wanted to kayak down a river that potentially would risk his life, he just did it. He wanted to take life into his own hands, make his own decisions, and take responsibility. From this perspective of his story, it instead shows a side of people being brave in a world that cautions us to think and act in ways that are more calculated and safe, that it reminds us to live simply and to play all out. But no matter how you work the information, the movie, the book, the interviews from his sister, and so on, we are left with this events marked by his leather belt he inscribed his journey into, and the little passages of notes he also left in the margins of the books he wanted to build his life upon. But I think the events of this story need to be actually broken down further with greater magnification, because even though you may hate what society is telling you, you cannot simply label Chris's actions so black and white, because you can get stuck at deciding whether he was doing work that was meaningful or not. You can say he was an idiot or he was living an amazing life. But I think those are premature conclusions. And this is where we will now use Viktor Frankl's quote on the space between a stimulus and a response. Chris, like Henry David Thoreau, seemed to want to know the most basic of stimuli in his world. And to do so, he had to strip away all the human-constructed things in his life, to the bare minimum of just a manufactured bus sitting randomly in the woods to live his life, to reduce himself to the books of the authors who inspired him to live the life he lived, to reduce himself to the land in which he lived off of, the food, the water, and the pure energy of being alive, so he could see the space in which he was to respond, to see the beauty of the landscape of the wild, to remind him what it truly meant to be a human being living on this planet. And his journal entries capture this well. They were short and simple. His words as he captured his ideal day living in Alaska were magic bus, squirrel, missed bear, misery, and spring day. And there is magic in seeing the day as this. Most people today can be said to have the equivalent attention span of a squirrel, scrolling on Instagram and hours of Netflix while ordering on Amazon, and here Chris was, years ago, devoting an entire day to the squirrel. Imagine you saw your day working with such simple pleasures in the world around you. The saying of stop to smell the roses actually hitting home for each and every one of us. And even though we might like the cliche on Facebook or Instagram of not letting life pass you by, if we're being honest sometimes, it does. And we not only miss the smell, but what the flower even looks like, settling for an AI-generated flower or a convenient photo of a flower someone else has posted on their social media. Chris wanted to see the world, to actually experience it in Alaska, not be told how to experience it from what his parents said to him or what college told him to work on. The movie shows the work Chris does in Alaska of him setting up his camp at the bus, building fires, hunting, preparing his meals. His work had a sense of harmony with the land, a sense of harmony with the world, and as he was finding, a sense of harmony in himself. I think we all want that sort of harmony in song and dance in us. But these simple truths eventually led Chris to his death, with the cause being tied to some poison from a mold off the plants he was eating. His emaciated body can be seen in his last selfies alive. He was nearly skin and bones. But we cannot point the blame for this simplicity as being the cause of his death, because there are dangers all around us, even in the city or towns in which you yourself live. Today, head down on the phone, you could potentially walk out into the street and get killed by oncoming traffic. It was actually indicated from 2011 to 2017 that 69% of walking injuries are actually related to people being on their phones, with a staggering, check this out, 259 actual deaths from people taking selfies. There's a lot to take away from this simple form of life Chris lived, how he cornered life to find the right amount of stimuli around him to respond in Alaska, how he didn't need a car to travel, didn't need a TV to see the beauty in the world. So let's turn to summarizing what lessons you can apply to find more meaningful work in your day. Lessons from Into the Wild to help you in your work. So we've gone along with this narrative in which we have learned about this guy named Chris McCandless, who had a rough upbringing with domestic violence. Society pressuring him to get a degree and working at these things in life. But he doesn't want these things. So he packs his bags to head west with the fewest amount of things he needs. And just like those searching for gold years ago, he goes seeking his fortune elsewhere. A different meaning of the word value, though, not what something was worth like his parents had taught him growing up. But this gold he was after was a certain truth in life. He drove life right into the heart of Alaska. He wanted to know how a truth looked like there. How did that smell and taste? He believed it was to be found in immersing himself in nature. In all honesty, when I first watched the movie, my reaction to my girlfriend after was that I actually felt sad for him. I didn't know what I know today after reading more in this man's life, but what I saw in this movie made me sad. How he had to run from those he was told to love and trust, to find what he needed to find in his own life. How he was torn with what to do in his world. It seemed no one could hear what he was trying to say, nor took the time for him to tell his story. Ron in the movie was the closest that seemed to be able to get deeper than the external wall Chris was putting up in the world. But like I said, I never met the man, so I don't know all the stories, and have learned over the years you can't judge a book by its cover. But his story has opened my eyes up once again to how we are to live life and find meaning. So what are these takeaways? These are mine. Point 1. Sense of freedom. Calling it by its right name. We have fantasy books where we envision a life outside of our reality. We get to use our imaginations to step outside the harsh, jagged rocks of reality. Our imaginations allow us to sail smoothly off into the sunset. Chris used the name Alexander Supertramp as his name throughout his travels to conceal who he really was. It allowed him, in my mind, to escape the clutches of evil he called materialism. It allowed him to battle society, telling him what to do and work in his life. It allowed him to strengthen his inner voice crying out what it wanted in this world. But freedom can sometimes come at a cost, and it cost him his life in the end, being as free as one could be in the wild. So when complaining about society and your terrible boss or crappy project you're working on, why not be the working class hero to save the day? Don't make it all cliché and crap, just call it by its right name. Remember, just because we think we want a sense of pure freedom and the power to do whatever we want to do in our imaginations, a train that is taken off the tracks is free, but it doesn't go anywhere. The great self-help legend Zig Ziglar reminds us. So call yourself by your right name when doing something, but you can have the imagination to be that working class hero to achieve it. Point 2. Cornering life to see the truth. Even though Chris tried to eliminate the materialistic things in his life, he needed some of them to survive. The bus being his shelter, the pots and pans used for cooking, his tent, the water bottle, bag of rice, the matches, the gun to hunt, the books, etc. We also need tools in our life to do our work on this planet. I think the trick here is to ask yourself, do we really need that next Amazon order? Do we really need that oversized truck to drive to and from work? Do you really need a bigger paycheck to make you happy? How about the 5th pair of sneakers you own in your closet? Because I think we can take the same enthusiasm to life Chris had about minimizing material possessions in our lives and not necessarily have to go to Alaska to find our own truths. But instead, begin to be as appreciative as Chris seemed to be based on his simple journal entries. He wanted in his day just to remember Spring Day or Magic Bus. And as a certified flow performance coach through the Flow Research Collective, we call this lowering your baseline dopamine levels. That is, to not be so addicted to the vast amount of stimuli in your day. Corner that stimuli in your world that are important and go after it with the necessary tools you need. It can even start with cleaning out the corner of your closet where that 5th pair of sneakers is in your room. Point 3. Creating your space in the world. Chris needed the vast openness of nature for his space to realize his sense of purpose in the world. The stimuli of mountains and nature to formulate the distance he needed to respond in being a human being. What space do you need? Maybe it's just your office. Maybe you find it in your bedroom, your favorite chair. Do you really need a bigger house? A bigger car? Do we need to supersize everything you order? Make it faster? I think the question with any of this, whether it be creating or reducing the space in your life, is why you're doing it. I think one thing that is creating a lot of tension and burnout today is the fact we are consuming more than ever. We want more of these things, but as we can see, some people can get burned out and go the other extreme, like Chris, and want way less. But if we go so far as to isolate ourselves too much from everything, well, this is something we can learn from Chris's story. Take, for example, if Chris didn't find that bus to stay in, would he have managed to survive for months in just his tent? I don't know, but the point is this. The question you really need to ask yourself is how much stimuli do you want in your world? Does your work throughout the day provide enough, too much, or even too little stimulation? Because a job that is boring won't provide enough stimuli to evoke a response of more than a yawn and trying not to fall asleep. But the fast pace of social media is just a fire hose of stimuli and it's going to keep you up all night. It'd be interesting to ask Chris what he thought of the world today. I bet he would say it's way worse with our consumerism and how these values have led us even further away from the gift of being alive in nature. So, create your world accordingly. Point 4. Isolation and relationships. Balance is the key here. We saw Chris isolate himself from the world and dies ultimately from it. But we all need our downtime. We all can get to a point where we have had enough socializing with others and need even just a moment to take a deep breath. It could even be after a long day of work or even just taking time to sleep at night. It could be from an argument at home or at work. But there are times, though, we need people. We need others in our lives. The psychologist Abraham Maslow himself indicated in his hierarchy of needs places that survival is first and then relationships are the next need after. And I think we see this in Chris's quote found in his belongings after he died. Happiness only real when shared. In Chris's isolation, he was able to grow his world back out. Finding that inner peace, he was able to put the pieces of his life back together to formulate a new picture of the world. He realized that finding isolation could bring him happiness, but it was only real when he was able to share it with others. Point 5. Got a couple more here. Don't leave spontaneity to chance. This is actually a quote from my favorite drummer, Neil Peart, from the band Rush, as he describes his creativity and his very calculated drumming sequences in the songs. But it resonates with Chris's enthusiasm for spontaneous adventure, like kayaking down a river rapid, and seeing what the next adventure awaited him. So is your day so calculated? Is even your workday so routine? How can you shake it up? Even trying something slightly different with the same mold can bring new life to what you're doing. For example, I'm right-handed, and one day I decided to start using the mouse left-handed. The point is to just shake things up, because sometimes these little things can allow for different ways to see how work could get done. Point 6, our last one here. Maintain your focus. I think what is most inspiring in the story of Chris McCandless is his relentless drive to get to his goal of reaching and living in Alaska. He risked his whole life for it and put everything into it. And because life can sometimes take you off your course, you have to have this strong why for why you keep showing up every day. He had a very strong why that he was even willing to sacrifice his life to attain it. So let's wrap this episode up. We've learned a lot about this man, Chris McCandless. And again, I recommend the book and the movie Into the Wild, so you can formulate more of your own thoughts on what Chris was trying to accomplish in the work he was doing. But as we've laid out, there's some lessons we can draw upon and inspirations from Chris's drive to corner life and respond to the truths before him. So remember, success is not a matter of good luck, it's good skills. And today's skill is to think about these 6 points we discussed and knowing how to corner and respond to the things you want in your life and get the most from them. And with that, we'll see you next time. Thank you. Hey, thanks for listening to the show. If you like what you're hearing, hit that subscribe button. If you want to be on the show, just reach out. Tony@philosophicalengineering.com. Thank you.